Okay, well, welcome everyone to Commit to Keiki's second Talk Story Forum. This afternoon, we're pleased to have with us businesswoman and former First Lady Vicky Cayetano, who is now candidate for governor. For those of you who don't know, Commit to Keiki is a nonpartisan education initiative in partnership with Early Childhood Action Strategy partners, the business community, philanthropy, and advocates and leaders from childcare and early learning, mental health, and family violence prevention. Our primary goal is to be a resource to the gubernatorial candidates and our next governor to ensure that investments are made that support young children and families, focused specifically on healthy early childhood development. Today, we have with us Terry George, President and CEO of the Harold K. Castle Foundation and Education Chair of the Hawaii Business Roundtable, who will be our moderator today. Let me go over a few quick points about how this talk story will work. It's intended to be a conversation with the candidate. We'd like to hear from Vicky about how she intends to prioritize programs for Hawaii's young children and families. Our moderator, Terry, will kick things off with some questions, and then we'd like to open it up to Q&A for our audience. Commit to Keiki steering committee members will have an opportunity to come off mute and on screen to ask their questions. Others in the audience, please send us your questions via the chat function. Hopefully, we will get to all of your questions during this hour-long discussion. Until we get to the Q&A session, we ask that everyone please leave your videos turned off so that we can spotlight Terry and Vicky as they're having their conversation. This forum is being recorded and will be made publicly available on Alilo. Thank you all very much for joining in what is sure to be an informative and exciting discussion. Terry, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Carrie, and aloha, everyone. As Carrie mentioned, I'm Terry George with the Harold K. Castle Foundation, serving as their president and CEO. You know, several years ago, Carrie and I first actually went to an education funders meeting in New Orleans, and we learned about this amazing effort in 2018 in California called the Choose Children campaign. And that campaign resulted in California's newly elected governor committing significant state investment in early childhood health, safety, and learning. So we got so excited that a team of us have now embarked on something similar in Hawaii that we call Commit to Keiki. So as I mentioned, the result in California really had a significant impact on children and families. And we think the same can and should happen here in Hawaii. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to former First Lady and candidate for governor, Vicky Cayetano, and introduce you, Vicky, to our audience. Vicky Cayetano was born on March 16th, 1956 in Manila, the Philippines, and immigrated to the US at the age of 3. She grew up in San Francisco, attended Stanford University, majored in business and economics, and she actually left Stanford through her, I guess, before your junior year, Vicky, right, to start a business. She's been a serial entrepreneur, and her first business was a successful travel agency, which she sold later. And then in 1982, Vicky moved to Hawaii, where she married and started a family. After divorcing, she raised her 2 children as a single mom, a working mother. An entrepreneur at heart, she co-founded United Laundry Services in 1987, and she's led that company as president for 34 years. And under Vicky's leadership, that company has grown to become the largest laundry company in Hawaii, employing nearly 1,000 residents. Vicky, it sounds like I'm campaigning for you. I'm just stating your record, and I promise you I'm being neutral with all candidates, but I just wanted everybody to know who you are a little bit. And the more recent history everybody probably knows, in 1997, Vicky married then sitting governor, Ben Cayetano. And as First Lady, she founded the Washington Place Foundation and raised more than $1.2 million in private donations for the construction of a new residence for the governor to allow Washington Place to be preserved as a museum. She's also advocated for animal rights and actually was instrumental in the passage of a bill banning the sale of shark fins in Hawaii. Vicky's been a longtime supporter of the community, and the Cayetanos and United Laundry Services together have donated to about 40 nonprofit and charitable organizations. In addition, the Cayetano Foundation Scholarship provides scholarships to students in financial need every year. So that's a little bit about Vicky, and let's begin our talk story a little bit. First, Vicky, a real easy one. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and so why are you crazy enough to run for governor? Why are you interested in running for governor?
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction. I've been very fortunate to have played a number of roles in my life, to have had the privilege of starting a business, an entrepreneur, a business from scratch with 25 employees, struggling with, like many people who've started a business, making payroll. We all have the same issues. And then, going on to serving in the community. It's a real privilege. It's not just for the community, it's learning from the community. And for me, that's the blessing I receive. Of course, former First Lady, having that perspective and having the ability to introduce not only the drive to make sure that Washington Place would be there into perpetuity and open to the people of Hawaii, but a number of other things that we also championed during the time there. So for First Lady, starting a business, but I think, the most important role is that as a parent, and that's a forever role. And I think that, having lived through that and still living through that, because it never ends. Once you're a parent, that love and that responsibility never ends. It's not like a business where you can quantify things. You have your challenges, you have your greatest joys, but the experience, I think, of being a parent and also being a single parent makes this issue so real, so close to my heart, because you experience it. As a single parent, I'm not sure I could have survived without A+. Frankly, that was a program that allowed me to be able to not worry about the children, after work, because you're starting a business, you can't just cut out. You've got those responsibilities. So between my parents helping me and a program like A+, I learned to really understand the value of what these types of programs can do for our people.
So Vicky, you've talked, if I could jump in, you've talked a little bit about your time when Ben was governor and how important, life as a parent and single parent, how that really makes these issues very important to you. Maybe just let's let the frame go out broader to just wanting to be governor. What are some of the main reasons that you decided to throw your hat in the ring and run for governor?
So when COVID hit, it was the most difficult time for our employees and our company. And you look around and it's all the problems that we have experienced over decades have only gotten worse with COVID. It's only exacerbated, whether you're talking about affordable housing, cost of living, homelessness, houselessness, crime, everything just got really bad. And I am not someone who's going to just talk about things and complain about it. I'm somebody who feels a real need to do what I have to do, to step in, use my 34 years of practical common sense experience and right this ship. Because I do believe that the problems we're facing will not be resolved with the traditional ways of looking at it. You need somebody who has a very different lens looking through this and using the creativity with collaboration, communication, and a real sense of urgency to address these problems and get them done.
That was a really helpful frame to get a sense of you and why you want to serve, Vicky, and how you will serve. Now let's turn to actually some specific priorities of Commit to Keiki, and I'm going to ask you a series of questions about those priorities. So Commit to Keiki has 3 priorities that we believe are critical for healthy early childhood development. Number 1 is access to affordable childcare and early childhood, early learning programs. Number 2 is access to family violence prevention and intervention programs and services. And number 3 is access to early childhood and ohana mental health supports. And I'll ask you questions about all 3. about how your administration would support increasing access. But let me start with the first one, childcare and early learning. What would your administration, Vicky, if elected, do to support increasing access for all children aged 0 to 5 into really quality early care and learning in Hawaii?
I think we really must look at affordable childcare and universal preschool for our children. You know, when you talk about rebuilding economy, it's not possible if you don't give this kind of support to so many in the workplace who need this before we can even consider them having the ability to get back to work. And how can we create a thriving economy if we don't address this? So to me, it's an absolute priority that we have to dedicate funding to. I remember when I was at the laundry years ago, actually, one of the things we looked at was creating childcare on our premises for our employees so that they didn't have to think about whether they should come to work or stay home in order to take care of, you know, their children. And one of the challenges I found was very interesting in really looking into that was that the insurance issue was a big problem, and that they wanted companies to not look at doing something that was, shall we say, outside of their scope of work. So as much as we want to do this, it really is important to understand what the challenges are to implement and to execute. But we must be determined to address them so that we can work with the private sector. There's nothing more that they would want than to have their employees be able to have their children be able to, you know, give them universal preschool. We also need to look at the state, obviously leading this charge. But my point is that I think that it's not only about identifying sites where we can do preschool, but I would think outside the box, and I would look to work with the private sector. Many now, as you know, they don't need as much office space as they used to. Could we convert some of those so that we can have preschool, childcare in these buildings?
That's really helpful, Vicky, you know, because it sounds like one of the things you would do is sort of work to knock down some of those barriers. You also mentioned that this is just critically important and must be done. And the good news is that the early work that the Commit to Keiki campaign did bears that out. We actually ran a statewide poll where we asked a set of voters across the state a series of questions about what was important to them and what they believed our next governor should address when it comes to our youngest children and our families. And the good news is that 74.5% of all responding voters believe that our next governor must invest more to create a series of high quality, publicly funded, community-based childcare and early learning programs. So it sounds like the voters are aligned with what you just shared as well, Vicky. Anything you want to add now that you heard those polling numbers?
I am not surprised because I think we have to recognize, like I said, first things first. And we need to take care of the youngest in our community before we can even think of the adults being able to thrive. We really must put a priority on this and make it happen, not just keep talking about it.
That's great. Now let me ask you about our second priority for Commit to Keiki. You mentioned when you talked about why you're going to run for governors that COVID-19 has just left such a mark on Hawaii. You know, 230,000 people have tested positive, and sadly more than 1,300 have died here in our state. And it's affected families across the islands, all businesses in immeasurable ways. One area has been mental health, and that's what I want to ask you about. You know, over 82.5% of respondents in our poll, an overwhelming majority, said it is important for our next governor to prioritize programs that address mental health needs for families and young children in the next budget. So how will your administration work to increase mental health supports in our budget for our youngest Keiki and their families, Vicky?
You know, one of the things we have to do is create that access, but in affordability and accessibility, staffing, these are all issues that we have to do. We also need to take away the stigma of mental health. We talk about it in our company as openly as we talk about physical illness. And this is really important because many of our employees, immigrants like myself, come from a culture where you don't talk about mental health. It's like branding your family as being defective or something. We need to lead the charge by talking about it. I've experienced it also firsthand. My sister is bipolar, and that is not something that you get cured of. It's something you manage for a lifetime. And because she's managed it with support, with insurance, but still very limited access, it's very difficult for her to even get an appointment. But in spite of that, she's been able to manage and actually thrive. But she's very aware of it. And it's because there's a family that talks about it, that acknowledges and supports her through that. We need that across our state. And we need to make sure that we don't always cut the budget for mental illness when we're, forced with challenges. It's the first thing that gets cut. And we are paying a very big price for it in the long run. So we need to understand the priority of mental illness, and we need to talk about it. But most important, we got to provide access, affordability, and staffing in order to make it happen.
So access, affordability, and staffing, reduce the stigma of it, understand what it is and how to deal with it. Thanks, Vicky, for that. Let me turn to our third priority area, which is family violence prevention and how it affects kids. In our poll, again, 85% of voters polled felt that the next governor should prioritize family violence prevention and intervention programs. Given what you know about, family violence, such as child abuse, neglect, and intimate partner violence, how will your administration increase access? And I guess I'll add increase affordability to these family support programs, Vicky.
I think there's two things. One, I'd really look at the laws and the way they are written. I think that if they must always err on the side of protecting the possible victim, the child, or in domestic violence, the victim, and too often I think the rights are on the other spectrum. And no child, even if they're exaggerating a claim of abuse, let's say, I would always err on the side of standing by the children. So I think we need to take a closer look at our laws to see if we can, give them more teeth to make sure that our social workers have the ability to always take care of the children first. And it's the same thing with domestic violence. How many times are the children returned to a parent who could be abusing them because there's not enough evidence? I'd want to take a closer look at that. That's one thing. The second thing I think we really have to understand is in the plight of the victims. So often they're, one, not making enough money to be able to leave the household. So they're choosing between failure on both ends. That shouldn't be. Women still today, disproportionately in terms of earning power, don't make as much. We need to address all of that. And then we need to create the support that would allow them to be able to leave that type of a home so that they get the support they need. I think if we can work on all three things, there would be more possibility that they would have the courage to leave that or to report that. But oftentimes when I talk to some of my friends who've gone through it, they're like, well, what am I going to do? And,
right.
It's like when I say to them, look, just come stay with us,
Mm-hmm.
there's an outlet for them, but we got to give them those options. Otherwise, I think that's one of the big problems for them.
Yeah. Let me follow up on one part. You've spoken a lot about domestic violence, which certainly impacts children. But since this is a focus on children, let me just single out and give you an opportunity to share your thoughts about addressing child abuse and neglect, as well as intimate. You've already shared about intimate partner violence. So As governor, what might you do to prioritize addressing and preventing child abuse and neglect, Vicky?
So I think we need to work through our Department of Human Services and work with the social workers there. That's another area where many of them are burning out. There aren't enough people to do the caseloads that they have. We need to really delve into that and see what we can do to give them the support they need, to look at the compensation. But if you don't have the staffing to address the caseloads, that is, 101 have to be addressed first and foremost.
So true. Vicky, I know that our audience is dying to answer questions, and I would encourage the audience to put your questions in the chat, because in a little bit we'll turn back over to Carrie, and then she'll kind of curate those to make sure that in the latter half of our hour together, Vicky, you have an opportunity to respond to questions directly from our audience. But while they're doing that, maybe I'll just ask you another question about your priorities. And you know this from the time when your husband was governor. There is so much that's thrown at you, so many things that come up, that it's very, very difficult to get more than 3 or 4 things done as governor, right? In that term, it's just so difficult. And it's been, publicized that some of your top priorities as governor include affordable housing, addressing climate change, overall reducing the cost of living, addressing homelessness, diversifying our economy. So, I'm wondering where early childhood development falls on your list of priorities, because often what you're going to have to do is to bump something up as a higher priority, you got to bump something back down. And those are the tough decisions that governors as leaders need to make, right? So how are you going to bump up early childhood as a higher priority, given all the other needs as we are emerging from this pandemic, Vicky?
So, Terry, as I've gotten out talking to people in communities, it's really interesting to find that it's really not either or, they're all tied together. So affordable housing is needed because when people are pressed to, if 40 to 50% of your paycheck is going to pay your rent, you don't have enough left. If you don't have enough left over, that creates a stress level, right? And then you have to make decisions on what you choose for your children. And that shouldn't be it. So affordable housing is key because it's at central to so many of the problems that we have in our community. Diversifying our economy. Why? Because we want our young people to stay here in Hawaii. And many of them don't necessarily want to work in just the service industry. So we have to look at what else we can do. So these are all tied together in order to have the necessary funding that we need to proactively address the problems that we see with mental illness, with children. One of the things I will say is, as a person with my 34 years experience, my whole training is on being proactive and not reactive. And I think too often in government, we're spending our money after the fact. I point to example, incarceration. If you incarcerate without a plan to rehabilitate, it is such a tragedy because it's not only the most costly solution, but you're throwing away all these people who could, not all, but a majority of them could one day with the proper rehabilitation be back into the community. So too often we're reacting to problems and we need to be more proactively doing it. One of the things I would do is I would look to piloting more pre-K schooling with our schools. I think there's opportunities there to work with them and also to work with the private sector on what we can do to expand our universal preschool programs and to create affordable childcare. I think that's really key, both.
I think those are, I'll just end with a quote that's ascribed to then Senator Joe Biden, just as a thought piece, since one of the key levers that a governor has is some influence on the state budget. So Biden was quoted as saying, "Don't tell me what your values are, show me your budget and I'll tell you what your values are." So I wondered, if you had any thoughts about that quote and the implications that has for your leadership as governor in the budgeting process for early childhood.
Well, that is absolutely true. We say that even in our company, right?
Right.
One of the things I find, for example, in the DOE budget, the allocation of 1% of their budget for special ed
Mhm.
is so woefully inadequate.
Right.
And, to those parents, we need to give them more support, recognizing that. So that is something I would absolutely address, working with the Board of Education on how can we do this. And I think it's really key as a leader, not just to dictate what the priorities are, but to really get in there, to work with the stakeholders to say, how can we accomplish this? Because I do believe that there's nothing more productive than when we work collaboratively together with clarity towards the same goal with a sense of urgency.
That's a great way to segue, Vicky, on that collaborative note, over to the next phase of this hour together. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Carrie. But thank you, Vicky, for this conversation. And let's continue now with Carrie leading questions from our audience. Go ahead, Carrie.
Great. Thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Terry. If I could please ask Heidi if you can get everybody up on the screen together, I think in gallery view. And then the steering committee members, if you can please come on video, we can start our next conversation. And then for all the participants that are not part of the steering committee, if you can please put your questions in chat. Please note that in the to section on chat, if you can indicate everyone, that way we can all see the questions that are being asked. Okay, are we in gallery? We are. Okay, would somebody like to start with a question? Otherwise, I can break the ice, but I'll first open up to the steering committee members.
We have one from Sherilyn, Carrie, I see.
Great, thank you, Sherilyn. Sherilyn, would you like to come on screen and ask yourself, or would you like me to read it? There she is.
It's having issues. Well, you can just go ahead and read it, Carrie. Why don't you do that?
Ellen.
Okay. So Sherilyn asks, early learning begins prenatally, and 0 to 3 is the critical age of brain development. Children 0 to 5 years old make up 44% of victims, and babies under 1 year old is the largest group of victims. Unfortunately, 89% of perpetrators are their parents. Additionally, the pandemic highlighted the important role that parents and families have in the growth, development, and learning of their children. What can your administration do to be proactive to support and empower parents to embrace this role and prevent child abuse and neglect? Thank you, Sherilyn.
Thank you. I think this is why, it's important not only to talk about universal preschool, but about the affordable childcare, because many of these children, the working parents, if they have access and affordability to having childcare, we could view that as also another arena for us to do wellness on the children that are brought there. But I think that many of these parents struggle between what they can do with their children, having to go to work. I mean, that kind of stress is so tremendous. And unfortunately, I think that oftentimes the youngest of these are the ones who pay the price, and it shouldn't be. So, I think that the affordable childcare component, which would take care of the youngest of these, even before we talk, and partnering with the universal preschool hand in hand, I think those two things are equally important. If we're going to both take care of our residents, our employees, but also to look at that as yet an opportunity for us to also pick up on some of the early indicators of children who may be abused.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question, Carrie? And Vicky, it would, I love the life experience that you bring with you. Knowing that and knowing the power of parents, I'm wondering how else, just challenge your administration to think about how you might empower parents to do some of that work. So not only to support them with childcare, reliable and high quality childcare, but what can we do to empower our parents to recognize their strengths and to be that role, their child's first teacher, which they really had to do. It was highlighted during the pandemic when they didn't have childcare. So what can we do to really support them, to find the resources, to find the education or whatever other supports they need to do their role?
You bring up a good point. And I think one of the ways we could, as I'm thinking kind of outside the box, is working with the private sector and bringing in people to help them, employees basically deal with special issues, whether it's about childcare or managing their finances during difficult times, and give them a form of credit for paying employees this time to talk about it. We always have to kind of straddle between privacy issues. So, for example, in our company, there are several of our employees who are right now expecting. And there's nothing more I would like than to be able to chat with them about, what it's like when you're going through this and the challenges you face. And that as an employer, we're here to support you. Then our HR says, we have to be very sensitive. We never want them to, they tell me you don't want to segment one group and make them feel like they're different. There's always a sensitivity, I'm told. So I think we really have to engage with people to ask like yourself as to what kinds of ideas can we do to support parents or parents-to-be with the stress that they're dealing with. Even before we talk about the affordability, accessibility to be able to have help, mental support, emotional well-being support. But to even know at what stage you need to get there, I agree with you. It can start even earlier. So how do we do that? I don't have the answer for you, but I think that working with employers, there's an opportunity there because they're the ones who see their employees day in, day out. How do we support them so that they can help their employees to get this, and I don't even want to call it help, but support, ongoing support that they could have. Because I think that's important to be able to identify it and then to be able to provide the availability and affordability to get the help they need.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, thank you, Sherilyn, and thank you, Vicky, for your thoughtful response. I appreciate you bringing up the role that employers play in helping to support our young families. So thank you for that. Joanne Farnsworth, you're up next.
Thank you. I really am enjoying this conversation, and I'm loving the lens of linking things together. So I see you really thinking that way, and I think that's the way real change happens, right? But how would you link these two? All three of the issues that we're talking about are part of the whole child, right? Part of the whole family that the child is in. And specifically, my question is, how would you link your commitment to universal preschool and quality childcare with really engaging and developing a system of early childhood mental health support?
So I think, as you say, they all have to be linked together. But before I say that, let me just share with you, in the coming week or so, I will be rolling out an economic plan. And in the economic plan, I call attention to two things. One is that we need to shift from what I call a tourism-focused economy to what I call a family-focused economy. And the whole call of this is to recognize you cannot just talk about economy in terms of dollars made. You must talk about economy in terms of how our whole families are impacted, the roles they play from school to work, preschool, everything. That is the family-focused economy that the state of Hawaii should be looking at. So that's a very important, to me, shift in how we view things. The other thing I think is really, really important is to work in all of these things, working with the legislature, because it's not just one part of our leadership, it's everybody who needs to understand these priorities. For one thing, no governor can be successful without a good collaboration and working relationship with the legislators. And so that's a very important relationship there. And it's shifting not just an executive branch mindset, but the entire administration and the ledge, everybody's mindset to understand the importance of the children, the youngest in our community.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I look forward to seeing that and hope to see some of these pieces woven into that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. You said one of my favorite C words, collaboration. So keep with that mantra. We have a question from Marissa Ross, and she says, at many public schools, A+ programs or after-school programs are no longer free. What would be the first steps you would do to change this?
So Marissa is certainly very qualified to ask this question. She is the mother of my 2 grandchildren, and one of them, who is on the spectrum, attends Aina Haina Public School. And this is where I learn about all the challenges, real life challenges that she and her husband, and I applaud them, because being parents is not easy. Work, the COVID situation, I mean, it's just really been the most difficult 2 years for them. And yes, A+ has gone up significantly, the cost of that. That is absolutely something that, again, doesn't speak well to what our priorities are. Because when I said availability, accessibility, I also said affordability. And so if it's not affordable, then to me, it's not accessible. So that is something that, I absolutely would work with the Department of Education, the Board of Education. Obviously, there's a certain way of going through these things, but moving with urgency to say, we've got to find a way to make this affordable for our people, because it's a good program, but when the cost is unaffordable, they can't make use of it. It's one of the reasons I called over a week ago to say that we need to suspend the general excise tax on food, medicine, and diapers, for people who are earning under $100,000, because it's just another undue burden that is too much for many in our community. So I appreciate that. I don't have an immediate answer, but I would say that that is a priority, and that we would definitely work to make it affordable for all of the students who go to A+.
Great, thank you, Vicky. Alice Luck from Kauai, I have you up next.
Good afternoon, Vicky. Thank you for being here. I just would like to ask about workforce. Many of the issues with the systems that we're talking about, the 3 pillars, rely on having a sufficient trained workforce to serve key positions in childcare, social services, and mental health. Aside from increasing salaries, how can Hawaii grow or attract and retain a qualified workforce to serve our Keikian families?
Absolutely. One of the things in talking to the University of Hawaii and the community colleges is a recognition that we need to do more to attract people to certain segments of the different professions, such as the ones you just mentioned. And one of the things that the community colleges are looking at, frankly, is more certification programs, not necessarily people who have the time or even the interest to go and get a 4-year degree. So I think that that's something we should look at. Of course, comes with it is what kind of compensation are these professions making, right? And many of them, the compensation level is really not adequate to either attract them or to retain them. So again, yes, it does come down to funding. I don't have an immediate answer. I recognize the need, And I think that's why I say, whatever the issues may be, one of the things we really must do is work together, but think outside of what we have been doing traditionally, because we have no time to make just small kind change. We have to have the courage to make bold changes if we're really going to have an impact on fixing our state and making it so that our people can live here and be the Hawaii that many of us remembered from years ago. It's really not that anymore. 5 years in a row, our population has shrunk. And the people who are leaving are the people we need in our community. They are the young people. And I share with you today, if the future of Hawaii is leaving the state, what kind of future do you think we can hope to have? This is what burdened me to say, I got to do something. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. I have Sean Kanayapuni up next.
Hi, aloha. Thank you so much for being here today, and I've enjoyed hearing from you. And I wanted to, my question is a little bit selfish as a nonprofit that does a lot of early childhood education, particularly with family interactive child learning. And we are struggling, we and many of my counterparts struggle to find adequate numbers of caregivers to provide those critical teaching and learning opportunities for young families as well as our youngest Keiki, as the last person suggested. And compensation is a critical factor. And when the nonprofits like ours think about, even raising minimum wage, which is necessary, and I support completely, we also run into state contracts that limit the amount of compensation or limit our budgets, I guess, to operate some of these services. And so just wondering, what your thoughts are about how to support, quality service and care for our youngest people, and to support nonprofits and public providers alike in meeting the challenges and needs of our youngest families.
Sean, I thank you for that question. And I would just share with you that when my economic plan, which is titled A Family-Focused Economy, rolls out in the next, I would say within the next 7 days, it will come out. You will be very happy to see a really innovative thought process plan as part of my plan that addresses exactly what you're saying. Because I share the same concern with you. Our nonprofit organizations provide the safety net to so many in our community. And yet, many of them, and I'm on a couple of the boards, I see this, we struggle to get the funding and the support. And without the money, how much can we do? Without funding, how do we execute on this? So I'm sorry that I can't say it right now, but just please make a point to look out my website and you will see it when we announce it. I think you're going to see it and the light bulb's going to come on and say, that is really quite interesting. But it is specifically to tackle this without creating an undue burden, I will say this, on taxpayers like yourself. Because it makes no sense to pull from one part that's already challenged to take care of another part. That doesn't work. And that's why, I feel excited with all the challenges and obstacles I see. I also see a lot of opportunities. So I'm somebody from an entrepreneurial mindset. I all see the glass as half full and not half empty. And my job is to make it full, but please stay tuned. I think you will see that, but I share that. And this is a very specific plan that addresses the concerns that you outlined, not only for you and your organization, but I'll share with you for many nonprofits who have expressed that concern to me.
Can't wait. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. I think a family-focused economy is music to many of the ears on this call. So thank you we're excited to see what that looks like. Megan, you're up next.
Hey, thanks. Aloha, Vicky. Really excited to read your economic plan. Thanks so much for sharing a little bit about that. My question probably piggybacks onto a lot of questions that have already been asked. But I want to thank you for, highlighting at the start of this meeting your, acknowledgement of the pandemic and how hard families were hit during the pandemic with the loss of childcare and I'm sure a lot of the mental health issues that really spiked at home and some of the things my other colleagues have talked about today. So I just really wanted to ask, as governor, what would your administration, excuse me, do to just increase maybe perhaps the number of state subsidies available to families, especially as the state continues to roll out its plan for public pre-K, which I think is entirely vital. There's still a need for affordable childcare spaces, so in the public and private sector. So, we're trying to help each other out. So what would your administration do to, increase, maintain subsidies for these families and not just, the hardest hit during the pandemic, but also the Alice families who are also struggling?
They struggle the most, and too much of our population falls in that group. So, with respect to healthcare, one of the things that I have been saying repeatedly is that there's no reason why Hawaii can't make a real concerted, collaborative effort to be the healthcare of the Pacific. This is an industry that not only provides good paying jobs to people, but more importantly, ensures the health of our residents. And if you go to the neighbor island right now, like on Hawaii Island, unless you're really ill, it takes like 4 months just to get a regular, exam scheduled. So there's no reason why we can't elevate this by working with organizations like Queens, Hawaii Pacific Health, so many of these. One of the things I'm finding really at the heart of the challenges we face is that there's such a lack of working together, collaboration. Everybody's expending a lot of effort, but people are working in silos, especially at the government level, whether it's county or state. And I know the mayors are working on that. A couple of them recently elected are really challenging to try to connect all the dots. And I see that at the state government level as well. And we could do a better job working with the counties to address some of the issues as well. But to the working families, I'm not going to just say like, we're going to give them X amount of rebate. I will say that, but when we get in, that should be a priority. I know that we can and should suspend. That's why I called for that. I can't do anything till I'm governor, but I called for that suspension. And very interestingly, I'm seeing a number of people in the political arena stating the things I've been saying, but really we need to do that for them. Suspend the general excise tax. It's a very regressive tax structure. And to have it on food, medicine, and diapers, I just don't see how that can be justified. It doesn't make sense. So to the working families, I think the childcare, affordable childcare, universal preschool, giving them accessibility for mental illness, because I can't imagine for many of those in the Alice population group, what kind of stress they must go through. I can't even imagine it. And that's something we really have to tackle and not just keep saying it's about the money. When you prioritize it, by golly, we will find the money and we will do it because that is the right thing to do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Vicky. Kaiulani, you're up next.
Aloha. Mahalo for the time today. It's really exciting to hear from you, and I agree that a lot of the things that we're hearing about is music to our ears. So mahalo for sharing. I had a question today, and I guess it's really specific to our Hawaiian language speaking community, being that we have 2 official languages in the state of Hawaii. And, you talked a little bit about the importance of access to the programs. Do you have any thoughts on how we can ensure protections for the Hawaiian language medium pathway when we're talking about things like expanding our state budget to include funding for childcare or other family support, so that families that choose Hawaiian language for their children will continue to have those opportunities available?
I think the best way of addressing that is to help people. Obviously, there are people who support, but then we're addressing those who may not understand the importance of this. And I think the message I would share with them is that having the Hawaiian immersion language program is important, not because it's just about teaching our children another language. It's about a way of life that we should, really treasure, that makes Hawaii the place that it is. We're not part of the mainland. We're so different from every state. And what makes us different is the gift from our indigenous people that we must cherish and ensure to perpetuate, So that is the message I would send, and educate, communicate to those who don't understand it, why it's so key. This is how we bring people together so that we can paddle in the same direction.
Mahalo.
And as a follow-up, I just want to share that, I have met with, educators and who have established that, early learning programs that integrate our Native Hawaiian culture and navigation, the language and indigenous mindsets are so critical to fostering and keeping Hawaii a place that we all love and respect.
Great, thank you, Vicky. We have Amanda and then Kanoi. Amanda?
Vicky, can you hear me okay?
Yes, now I can hear you. Thank you.
I'm a board member at the Association for Infant Mental Health in Hawaii, and we work really with a good group of interdisciplinary folks. So folks that are kind of across the board in terms of people that affect and touch and connect with really young children. And so it's doctors and teachers and home visitors and any kind of professional really that's going to be a part of that early brain development period, that 0 to 3, that critical time. And knowing everything that you're saying, it's wonderful talking about interdisciplinary work and holistic approaches and understanding that for really the protective factors for our youngest, they're going to be the whole systems around them, right? It's going to be everything that's surrounding them that's going to affect ultimately their long-term mental health and that early brain development period. And so knowing that it's so interdisciplinary and knowing that we have to take all of these angles, how do you imagine that we are going to break down some of those silos and fund some of the really interdisciplinary work that's going to support what's we're seeing already right now is a really tough transition towards the family focused economic policy that you're working on. But coming out of COVID, knowing that we're looking at serious toxic stress, we're looking at increase in all sorts of, how do you imagine that we're going to take an interdisciplinary approach to professionals who work across the board in terms of funding some of this work? Because it tends to be, this is for these guys and this is for these guys. But I heard you talk about the importance of programming, about family structures and supports. I heard you talk about social workers, and I'm going, yes, 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 yes. How do we support that type of work in a holistic way in terms of funding that when we tend to be broken up into silos in our funding structures?
So I'll share with you, Amanda, that one thing that we haven't discussed that to me is key to being able to getting this is to discuss the issue called liability. So everything we do in life, nothing is a guarantee. And when you're dealing with human beings, with babies, with the ones we love the most, and let's say we do have programs that take them on at 6 months, 9 months, the earliest stages when the brain development. But through no fault of any program, the child's development is compromised. For many organizations or individuals, the biggest concern is also then, are you going to blame me for the lack of care or what I did? This is their biggest, because when I talk to our companies, when we were really wanting to create affordable childcare from 8 weeks on, because many of our parents couldn't afford to be out for too long. They want to come back to work. We talked about that. That was interestingly the biggest challenge. So this is why I say how big our network has to be to really create a successful program. So then now we have to involve insurance companies, attorneys, to say lawmakers, because everybody who wants to see this happen we all must also recognize that we don't have a crystal ball to predict that every child's going to go perfectly, right? So at age 2, they get diagnosed with something. I think this is one of the biggest fears that organizations, if we're going to expand this, we have to be able to protect those who are giving the care to them. And the child at that age has no way to even speak of anything, right? They cannot advocate for themselves whether this happened or not. This is one of the biggest challenges and will be a huge thing to overcome when we talk about wanting to create these programs. Again, for the funding, not only at the federal level, but at the state level, I think, and as your polls have shown, your survey showed, there's overwhelming support. But how do we connect it to create programs that are meaningful, that are workable with the right kind of staffing, and to make sure that later on somebody doesn't come back to say that this program failed my child? This is a big question that I could not answer when we were looking at it for our company. So you folks are experts and, really good at this. So I would ask you to be thinking about that too, because sometimes there are unintended things that happen, accidents and sometimes nothing. But some parents, will look to the care that was given to them 6 to 8 hours a day and say something must have happened there. This is a big challenge.
I will just say really quickly, I just appreciate so much your acknowledgement of the vulnerability in the work, and that we're all just people trying to help people, and your acknowledging of that additional layer and wanting to work with that and through that is really important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Vicky. Is it okay if we have one more question from Kanoi Enos, and then I'll turn it over to Terry? Kanoi.
Okay, aloha, Vicky. Thank you. I wrote in the chat, I actually just want to thank you for, I think, acknowledging the importance of early childhood. My question was really about the recent instances of gun violence within the state, and it's hard not to feel like we're in a powder keg. And in my question, there's a really safe argument could be made that a lot of the gun violence we see now has its roots in unsafe homes 15 to 20 years ago. And I heard you talk about being proactive. My question really is, how do we have everyone understand that unsafe homes affect everyone, right? Unsafe homes for kids now affect homes from Makaha to Kahala, right? Violence doesn't necessarily, especially random acts of violence, trauma doesn't necessarily doesn't care who it picks. And so how do we have everything from the private sector to the public sector that one of the greatest assets we have is our proximity with each other, and we understand how to share resources, and that how do we understand, how would you lead a charge in having the entire community, Hawaii's residents, understand that this is a kako effort. Violence is a kako effort. Shouldn't always fall on the police, the EMS, the social workers, and when they fail, go, why didn't you do enough? It's because I only had tie wire and duct tape, right? So how do we understand that everybody really has shared kuleana to address this? And just your thoughts on that, and maybe a platform on how to get that across.
So I think there's my answer is 2 parts. First, I think that by and large, Hawaii is still a place where people really do care for each other. The frustration has been, and I've experienced this myself, when I thought someone was being abused. Call the police, nothing happens. It's like, how many times do I call? Nothing happens. We need to really work with law enforcement, legislatively as well, to, like I say, strengthen the laws so that something can be done, and that somebody who may be hurting someone isn't allowed to repeat it over and over and over again because we don't have the evidence. So you've got to really get down to the details, but I think that's one thing to do that. Same with the child. Why does the child keep getting returned? Oh, we didn't have enough evidence to be able to do that. Always err when it comes to children, especially, or the victims, err on the more cautious side. One is one too many times already. That's it. So we need to really look at the laws and work with law enforcement. Because when I talk to my friends who are in the police department, they get frustrated. They say, we go there, but nothing happens either. There's not enough to do anything. The second thing is, I will share with you, I was really disappointed to see that there's virtually very little state involvement with domestic violence outside of Oahu. We're fortunate to have a couple of agencies here, but on the neighbor island, how can this be? What, are they expected to call Oahu for help? They need help in their backyard. Because of that, because there are no resources, everything is under the radar. Nobody talks about it. So we have got to expand this support to all islands. That's the other thing that I would say. As far as for the laws on gun control, it's always a fine line, right? There are those who want their rights. And to me, I would always, again, err on saying that I'd rather we make sure that it's enforced properly, so that people who may be questionable with their mental state of mind should absolutely not have any access to holding a gun or even being in a place where there's any kind of ammunition that they can use to hurt someone. But we all know what happened to that poor woman. I mean, the person who beat her to death had just been arrested and just released outside Kapolei police station. How has that happened? She paid with her life. How can this be? So we really have to strengthen the laws, work with law enforcement in order to address this more aggressively and be able to produce the results. I do think most citizens are doing their part, but unfortunately, and I've experienced this myself, nothing happens. We got to do something about that.
I hate to bring this conversation to a conclusion because there's so much more we could talk with you about, Vicky, but we know you've got a campaign to run. I just wanted to thank you on behalf of all of us from Commit to Keiki for taking the time to engage in this conversation. We hope you found it as rewarding as we did. For everyone on the call, if you like what you heard and you want to learn more about Vicky Cayetano and her campaign, please go to www.vickyforgovernor.com. We're going to have another series of forums with Vicky and the other gubernatorial candidates between mid-May and June 15th for another round of conversations. So if you wanted to have further discussions with Vicky, stay tuned. We'll announce that to you. But on behalf of all of us, I want to thank all of you for joining us, particularly you, Vicky. Belated happy birthday to you as well. It was just last week. This is important work, and we're committed to this Commit to Keiki campaign because children need to be raised up as the single most important priority for our state. And if you want more information about Commit to Keiki, just follow us on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, and you can go to our website, which is simply committokeiki.org. Mahalo to all of you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you
Aloha.
all.
Thank you, Vicky.
Vicky.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you,
Thanks, everyone.